as part of efforts of the federal government to resolve the industrial action by members of ASUU, a meeting was held by education stakeholders to find amicable ways of bringing the protracted strike to an end. The Minister of Education, Mr. Adamu, who opened the meeting, said one major issue why the government and members of ASUU had failed to reach an amicable agreement was the issue of the law on no work, no pay. But with the emergency meeting that went on, there is hope that the strike might soon be called off. Joining us from our Abuja studio to discuss some of the issues discussed and the solutions is Secretary General, Committee of Vice Chancellors of Nigerian Universities, Professor Yakubu Aboki Ochefu. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast, Prof.
Thank you and good morning, viewers.
Right. From your point of view, with the meetings the federal government is having with some of the stakeholders on this matter, would you say the government is on course to ending the impasse between them and ASUU?
Yes, I think so. The government is on course. There's commitment from all stakeholders that the students and parents who are at the receiving end of this very debilitating strike should be resolved forthwith. And so there were 7 outstanding issues that ASUU had put on the table, and our committee, working with the pro-chancellors and other stakeholders, have been able to whittle down to 3. So it is those 3 issues that we are waiting for federal government to give us a feedback, and once that is done, you should begin to hear that ASUU has called off the strike, and the Senate is reconvening to determine a new calendar and get on with the rest of the academic sessions.
Yeah, what can you let us know what those 7 items are, and you whittled them to 3, and how did you get to 3, and what are those 3?
Yeah, the 7 items basically had to do with the payment platform, the IPPIS, the rejection of IPPIS, had to do with the stabilization fund and allowance, had to do with the report of the visitation panel, had to do with the legislation to ensure that National Universities Commission does not license universities indiscriminately because it's putting a lot of pressure on the system. So these were the 5 major items that we said, look, these are considerations for considerations for a broader decision. Where we are now, we want what is the irreducible minimum that ASUU will accept so that we can reopen the campuses. And that had to do with the salary increase, that had to do with the no work and no pay, and then the end allowance. And we said, look, these are the 3 key core issues that that are fundamental to the strike being called off. So let us focus on those ones, while the other issues are longer-term issues that have to do with the nature and character of the university system, our governance system, our funding system, our curriculum, and all those broad issues that we will have a session where all the stakeholders will come and we will have brutally frank conversations on where our universities should be in the course of our national development and in the course of delivering 21st century education to our children.
All right, you're watching TVC Breakfast. We're discussing with Professor Yakubu Aboki Ochefu, and we're discussing the outcome of the meetings and issues around ASUU generally. Professor, if you can hear me now, I was asking you earlier, the issue of no work, no pay has been on and being controversial for a very long time, even before in previous strike actions. Talk to us basically, when this issue comes up, the side of government have their own claim in the eyes of the law. The side of ASUU always also have their own claim in the eyes of the law. But let us go into the letter of the law. What does the law say about this no work, no pay, as a way of educating and enlightening us before we go into the issue of why are we on either side of what the law says about this no work, no pay?
The point is that the Nigerian labor law is very clear on that. If you declare an industrial action, you have to understand that if, as long as you don't work, the period that you were not at work, you will not get paid. So there's no dispute about what the law says. And ASUU is not contesting what the law says. What ASUU is saying is that given the peculiarities of university education, somebody has to come back and do that work. And who better than and who you're not paying? Because if you taught a course for 10 weeks, a semester is 15 weeks of lecture and an examination. So you taught a course for 10 weeks, and you were supposed to administer examinations, and you do not you went on strike, and those exams could not be administered. Once you come back from strike, those examinations must be administered before the student can move to another class. So it's a state of status as it were. If you don't complete the curriculum, the defined curriculum of the semester, you cannot roll over the session. It's not like any other industry in the world, you know. So who is going to do that work? And is that person going to do the work for free, or are you going to compensate him one way or the other? So we said, look, yes, we not understand what the law says, but can we find a doctrine of necessity of some sort, some administrative variable of some sort that will say, okay, get somebody to do that work, pay him an overtime, pay him an administrative overhead or something, so that we can roll over to the next session. Because as we say that if you don't pay us for that one, we'll leave it, and then the administrators of the system will now know how to do the transition. And it doesn't work that way. That is the point we are trying to make, that both sides need to shift ground a bit and say, okay, even if you say, okay, we will not pay you for all that session because we are talking 6 months plus now, we will pay you for half or something. Let us work out something that will be mutually acceptable. But to say you will not, for that period, the law says you won't work. If you don't work, you don't get paid. We agree. But who is now then going to do the work to do the transition? That is where we are.
Now, what in your view would be a mutually acceptable plan from your point of view with regards to this matter on the no work, no pay?
My view is that federal government should shift its hardline position and not look at and understand that university setting is peculiar, and that peculiarity must be recognized. And as if government understands that somebody has to do that work, and that person needs to be compensated for that work, because that work is not going to disappear, it's not going to go away. So I believe that there should be some understanding on part of federal government to accommodate these peculiarities.
From what you have said, from how you have whittled down the whole matter, you've whittled it down to no work, no pay, salaries. We heard that the government has proposed 35% increase for professors and 23.5%, if I'm correct, for the other lecturers. And then you have also earned allowance, if I got you clear. Those are the three. And you call them the minimum. Does it not turn the whole thing, the whole strike into a matter of how much the lecturers want for their pockets and not necessarily privileging the state of Nigerian universities? Because you said, okay, once you take care of these matters, we can talk about the other issues later for better destruction. But we can, once you take care of my pocket and my pay allowance and all of that, we can now go back to school. So it turns out that was what the whole thing was about.
Yeah, the proprietor of the federal universities is the federal government. And ultimately, it is the proprietor, just like you are the head of your household, ultimately, the fundamental decisions on the type of environment that you want your family, your children to live and grow in will be determined by you and the funds that you say are available to you, ultimately. For the people who are working for you, they can ultimately also speak for themselves. ASUU has, for the past 30 years, been drawing government's attention. In this case now, you as the leader of your household, drawing the attention that some of the decisions you are taking as far as the environment with which your children are growing up will have deleterious effects on you in the future because of this, and that. And to be fair to you as the owner of the household, you have listened to some of this advice and have been making corrections, But over time, you have fallen back and issues have now congealed. And we are saying, okay, here we are in a situation whereby you say you don't have money, you cannot afford it. And we want to believe you. But the analogy is like I come to your house and ask you to give me 100,000 naira to do something. And you say you don't have money. And we believe you. But right under there, while I'm still with you, you now ask your other assistant to go and buy you 20,000 naira suya and one bottle of wine that costs another 20,000 naira. No. So your suya and wine is more important than my welfare, as it were, or whatever plea I came and made to you. That is the type of scenario that ASUU is saying, that government is not being sincere when it says it does not have money for education. Government says they cannot borrow money for education. If you cannot borrow money to pay your children's school fees, what else can you borrow money for? So the increase that we talked about, it has been analyzed and we have looked at it. Salaries of university workers have not been increased in nearly 12 years. And after that 12-year period, you now come and pay and add 50, 60,000 to the take-home salary, because what ends up in your as your take-home pay is what we are talking about here now. The 800,000 naira that was agreed between the MIBRICS committee and federal government is salaries that professors were taking 10 years ago, if you do the dollar conversion rate. But we don't even want to go there. Give us what we think is reasonable and fair. Give the university professors. You imagine a vice chancellor of a Nigerian university taking home 700,000 naira a month. The vice chancellor of the University of Lagos, right there, call him and ask him how much is his take-home salary. 700,000 naira a month. A professor there who is at the bar, used to take 450,000. And you now say, okay, they are going to add 50,000 for him. And you say he should be happy after 11 years. So these are some of the contending issues that we are saying, in addition to the functioning of the university system, the way it operates. Councils can appoint a vice chancellor, a bursar, and a registrar, without recourse to anybody. But in the appointment of a messenger or a clerk, you have to get permission from the office of the head of service. What type of autonomy is that?
Yeah, that's the issue of autonomy. Again, let's go to that issue of autonomy. The vice chancellor, former vice chancellor of University of Technology, Mina, Tuko Sad, has said that universities have the autonomy and that they have not really exercised the courage of their own privilege by amassing the enormous potential of the universities to make money for themselves and not wait for the minister or so to decide for them what to do, and that the council itself is made up of more people who are members of ASUU than people from government, and that the ASUU itself, the government and the VCs, they have the powers to make the universities what they want. Like you keep distracting yourself saying the government is stealing money and so on, rather than face up how you can build your own universities and use your own goodwill, make money, and then the federal government cannot stop you from making money.
It's understandable, some of those points that former VC has made, but we need to contextualize it. You have the law that is clear as far as autonomy issues are concerned on the one side. You have the regulatory agencies, the National Universities Commission in this case, Then you have other agencies of government that through third-party legislation, circulars and things like that, that constrain some of your decisions. So on the one hand, the autonomy we're talking about, the law establishing university says you can manage your finances. On the other hand, Office of the Accountant General says for your salary bill of all your workers, you have to get clearance. It has to be paid from a single source. The Office of the Head of Service says you cannot recruit anybody except you get clearance from me. The Federal Character Commission says you cannot recruit anybody. And all these are basing their decisions on circulars and legislations that they are empowered to do so. You know, you are a vice chancellor, your governing council, you cannot enter a lease agreement with any party if that lease agreement is going to extend over 22 years. You have to go and get approval from the visitor of the university. You know, so you have autonomy autonomy we're talking about has to be situated into a context. And that context is such that you don't have the power, for example, to introduce tuition fees. The fees that they say they are paid in federal universities are user charges. We have said that over and over and over again. And even in the context of these user charges, the National Assembly, when they come for oversight functions, interpret user charges as revenue and tell you that the law says, the Fiscal Responsibility Act says, whatever revenue that is coming to any government agency, 25% of it must be remitted to the National Assembly as their own contribution. You know, so when they say it is universities that are not exercising their autonomy, we have to contextualize it within this wider framework that we are talking about. And that is why we were saying that that conversation must be had. Let us reopen the universities, let our students come back, let us salvage whatever is left of the academic sessions, you know, and then we'll now sit down and have this brutally frank conversation about the nature and character of our university system, especially within the context of governance and autonomy.
All right, Professor Ochefu, it's good you've given us these perspectives. And of course, the laws are the laws, but it seems in moving forward in the 21st century, some of those laws seem to stand in the way of development. Nigeria is not the only country with educational system and trying to move forward. We've seen how these things work in other countries, especially in the Western world. The university system has all the intellectuals concentrated. How challenging would it be for them and even all of you who are stakeholders to sponsor a bill to try to unify the system, to try to, you know, melt down all of these laws that, you know, hamper the decisions that you're supposed to make on one hand? How challenging would that be?
Yeah, the Committee of Vice Chancellors of Nigerian universities, the Committee of Pro-Chancellors of Nigerian universities, we've been working together to look at this legal environment because, like I said, there are secondary legislations in other components of government that have direct implications on what we do. The law establishing the National Universities Commission needs to be reviewed. That is in the process. The laws establishing some of the other regulatory bodies, some of the other professional bodies who also have elements of their law that says they can determine how we teach, what we teach, how we structure our own internal governance processes also needs to be reviewed. So there's work. In the last 2 years, we've been working with the National Assembly to see how we can review and harmonize all these laws so that we have one new legislation that takes care of some of these things that we have seen are deleterious as far as the operations of the university system in Nigeria is concerned. And I agree with you. Globally, a lot of flexibility and fluidity has been introduced into the system, and many of the environment that we inherited from the British university system and some of the American university system, they've moved on to take into consideration the changing times and changing environments. That our management and governance must be nimble, must be responsible, must be accountable. You know, and the stakeholders who are the students should be given priority as far as whatever decisions we're taking is concerned. This is what is happening in other parts of the world. But our own governance structure is still way, way behind. And like I said, in the last 2 years, all these governance bodies, internally and externally, have been working very hard to see how we can make a new presentation to the National Assembly.
Well, the federal government has said that it cannot, enter into a negotiation. It cannot resolve in terms of it cannot make a promise it cannot keep. And so it came up with the 23.5% increase for lecturers and 35% for professors. And the SANU is kicking with regards to this development. And I am wondering what you make of the direction the government is taking with regards to this. And we see also ASUU also reacting to this arrangement the government is coming up with.
It's quite frankly, it's going to be very difficult to convince ASUU to accept that package, quite frankly. If ASUU does accept that package, it will mean that they are willing to pay a greater sacrifice. Because like I said, salaries have not been reviewed for over 10 years. And in the review that is being proposed, where you subject that consolidated salary to tax, what ends up in the pocket, the take-home pay of the professor at the bar will be like about 510, 520,000 thereabout, which is like 60,000 on top of what he's currently earning. And so it's going to be a very difficult conversation, and I shudder to think that if that is the final. I agree with government that part of what has happened in the past is that they've rushed to sign agreements and they've not been able to fulfill these agreements. Some of the agreements we're talking about go back way back 2009. So let us see how we can settle this once and for all. But the environment we are trying to prepare is, okay, can the schools open and this conversation keep going? What can government do to say, okay, let me give you this one single thing to enable the schools to open so that we can have this conversation and begin to look for ways of solving the bigger problem of the university system. That is what we are looking at. But quite frankly, if that is the best government can do, 35%, while ASUU is asking, while the stakeholders are saying, let us offer ASUU 40%, then it's going to get protracted.
If it's going to get protracted, so you're giving us a sense that we have no reason to be optimistic unless government says it can pay more. The government is not likely to pay much more because the salary you've just told us now is actually, quite frankly, very, very low. For a professor and for a lecturer in the university, it's really low. But this is also part of the major problem that universities have to be nimble, to use your own language. So what do you think will be the way out if this is the rot that is, R-U-T, if this is the rot that is now ahead of us?
I often use the term that we have to positively disrupt our educational system. I recall in a session we had with former head of state, General Obasanjo, he said to us, the Committee of Vice Chancellors, that education is one thing that we have not really gotten right in this country. And we tend to agree with him that we all understand how important education is in the life of every nation. We all understand the importance of all the tiers of education, from primary, secondary, adult, and non-formal. So indeed, the Committee of Vice Chancellors and the Nigerian Governors Forum is saying, look, can we have a policy dialogue to dimension some of these issues? So we really need to take very hard and critical look at what we have been doing so far. The National Universities Commission has worked very hard in the last 2 years to upgrade our curriculum, which we had not done in nearly 30 years. So a new curriculum is in the offing. But for this strike, this curriculum will have been introduced that takes a very hard critical look about how we teach, how we learn, how we do research, our subject areas of concentration. The Tertiary Education Trust Fund, which again you all know is a product of ASUU, has also said, look, We've done a lot in the last 10, 15 years in providing physical infrastructure. Can we now move into the areas of capacity building? How to train, how to get our lecturers to get their PhDs? Can we now look for more money to do research? This government, under the leadership of President Buhari, has jacked up the National Research Fund from 3 billion when they came into office to nearly 10 billion now. So all those things they have done, but when it comes to taking very hard, critical decisions on where education up, in terms of say, okay, can we lock down a certain percentage of our GDP to fund education for the next 5 years? Can we take some of those hard decisions to fill these gaps that have been created over a long period of time? This, I think, is where the political will on the part of all the stakeholders, can we step back a bit and say, okay, between governments, the unions, the alumni associations, the community in which the universities are located, can we reconstitute our governance teams to create public trust bodies that will manage these educational institutions in such a manner that will incorporate this nimbleness in decision making that we are talking about, this creativity that needs to be brought into the educational system that we are talking about. So these are very core arguments and debates that we must have, to chart a way forward for our institutions. What we are doing now is just, excuse me to use the word, is just patch as it were. But we need to patch it so that we can go back to school and then sit down and have this conversation.
Yeah, Professor, let me use your word, the patch thing that's going on now, isn't that's what the challenge has been since 2009. Since then, there has been strikes upon strikes almost every 2 years. There has been one strike or the other concerning the same things that were, put together in 2009. Because of the patch, one would say that something really has to be done. But you mentioned some of them, that something has to be done. But how do you get government on one hand, ASUU on the other hand, and all the stakeholders within the education system to say, look, this is not just about the salaries of anybody or about the ego of somebody else. This is about Nigeria and the future. How do we begin to hold that difficult, challenging conversations where everyone is on board and then they agree on how we make education a system, instead of the issue of, I come to make a request, you agree to me, you refuse, I refuse, we fight, as it has always been?
Yeah, the conversation, like I said, it's already in the works. Some of the background issues we have already started, and we had hoped that by now the stakeholders in the education ecosystem will have begun to say, okay, in terms of trajectory of action, in terms of commitment, in terms of the willpower to accept or reject some of these things. For example, a major thorny issue is in public universities and public institutions is that of tuition. The political will to have a brutally frank conversation about tuition and the role it plays in improving the funding to the universities. The fundamental argument about cost sharing. To what extent do parents and government or the proprietors share costs as far as funding of the universities is concerned? All those very difficult arguments, we've started a conversation at the background. But where we are now is for government to say, this is the policy document we came into office. This is the commitment we came into office. But this is the reality of our economic situation. So what aspects of our society, of our policy trust do we sacrifice? Because right now what government is saying is that the financial burden of these universities, of funding university education, has gotten too heavy for us, too enormous for us, and we cannot take it any longer. And ASUU is saying that government is not being sincere you know, because on the one hand, you say you don't have money. On the other hand, you are establishing new universities. So that's why I say, that's why I use that analogy of somebody saying he doesn't have 100,000 naira and he's buying 20,000 naira suya. So, there are trust issues that have crept into the conversation. There are ideological issues that have crept into the conversation, you know. So the stakeholders at the level, especially this committee that was formed yesterday, or the day before yesterday, that the vice chancellors, the pro-chancellors, the leaders of the academies, the Academy of Science, Academy of Letters, and Academy of Social Sciences, you know, all those, the registrar of JAM, the executive secretary of TED Fund, all those key stakeholders who now are people who, and then of course ASUU, the unions, not just the academic unions, but the non-teaching unions as well. All those critical stakeholders will now say, let's come together and begin to dimension this conversation and then see how we can forge a way forward. We must have it. There's no going away. And I think this committee is the best committee to now put all the stakeholders on one page to have that conversation.
Right. Let's take you back a bit to something you mentioned earlier, that you said talks were ongoing with regards to it, which has to do with the curriculum. A lot of persons have said that the curriculum in our universities are obsolete and something has to be done. And I'm wondering if you could give us an insight into the review, what it is that your association and on this conversation is coming up with that might turn things around in the universities.
Yes, the National Universities Commission under the current Executive Secretary, Professor Adamu Rashid, when he came to office 2015 thereabout, I invited all the vice chancellors and said, this is what I would like to do. And he singled out curriculum review, and everybody agreed that it's been long overdue. So the whole process of reviewing a curriculum that is going to prognosticate what will happen in the next 10, 15 years is a very rigorous one. So experts were brought in and put a draft together, and that draft was sent to the universities to say, look at it, this is what we are thinking, make your own inputs. And that took like about a year. So because we're saying there are critical skills that are now globally required, given our global environment, given the fourth industrial revolution. There are those core skills that every student in the university must have. The philosophy of university education also has to be contextualized. So it took a long time. We worked on it. And then it was now given to subject matter experts to now bring the final draft together under the leadership of Professor Peter Okebukola. We were able to finish that assignment earlier this year and presented it to the National Universities Commission and the Ministry of Education. So the insights are that, for example, logical skills, entrepreneurial skills, digital skills, financial literacy skills are things that we must build into the curriculum, so that once a student graduates from any academic discipline whatsoever, he's able to operate in an environment, operate and relate with the wider environment to take advantage of the type of skill sets that industry requires, the type of skill sets that are needed in society at this stage of our development. And like I said, prognosticate into the future and see what is on the threshold, what is on the horizon, you know, and structure yourself in the manner that once that horizon meets with you, you are not deficient in terms of your capacity to engage with that environment.
I feel that, what is going on in the universities itself requires some form of a major summit that will bring about all stakeholders in the country to look at the issue of universities, including funding and also delinking the universities from the federal government.
Sorry, I really can't hear you. I'm struggling to hear you. You need to speak a bit louder, please.
I'm shouting as I'm here. I'm saying that it seems, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. It seems that we'll need a special summit on Nigerian universities in this country in order to ensure that universities are able to take care of themselves and not allow government to put its fingers in the universities, like paying school fees and finding its own way of sourcing itself, because it seems to me the whole problem boils down to how much money the universities have. And when you are talking about, I want you to address that, as well as the issue of whether the universities should not strike out on their own to, decide what their curricula should be. Why should IFE, for instance, have the same curriculum with Ibadan or with Lagos when they can do it on? When I was at IFE, the literature department used to say that they had a different program from that of Ibadan, and that they were boasting about how their own was different from that of Ibadan. Universities have their own traditions. We can't make them unitary under one blanket and say this is how to go. Every university should strike out and so on. Harvard moves is a different way. Oxford moves a different way. Cambridge moves a different way. They have their own areas of strength and their own engagement with the future.
I agree with you that the summit is long overdue, and I said the basic building block for that summit is already being operationalized. So we will definitely get to see that summit very shortly. I also agree with you that universities need to develop their own unique character. What NUC did was to say, let us have a core curriculum that captures between 60 and 70% of what skill sets that as a nation we need to have in this particular discipline. The remaining 30% will be layered upon by the university to bring in their individual idiosyncrasies, like you have said, in terms of their focus. So if, for example, University of Ibadan Economic School wants to focus on macroeconomics, that will now be the thrust of the 30% that they will build in their curriculum. If Obafemi Awolowo University, on the other hand, wants to focus on monetary economics, so that if you graduate with a degree in economics from Obafemi Awolowo University, everybody knows that your strength will be in monetary economics, then they are free to do so. So it is a mixture of the two types of scenarios that you talked about, but the agreement across the board from the university system is that we must have some form of uniformity. For example, we need any student who is graduating from the Nigerian university system to have an understanding of the language of communication, technology skills, financial literacy skills, digital skills, the philosophy of science, the history and culture of the peoples of Nigeria. These are all core generic curricula that the student must pass through. And then the universities, each university will now come and say, okay, this is what I want to specialize in, and then you take it up from there. But for the summit, I agree completely with you that it's been long overdue. We've started working on the background, and this committee that has been put together will definitely be the building block that will now take it up and come out with far-reaching decisions of, say, how can we as universities take our own destiny into our own hands. It's not only about funding, because the quantum of funding you get, what are you using it for? What is your research focus? What is your research to market strategy? What are the experiences of the students on your campus? I was getting information from some American universities that said from the moment you get an admission letter that this university has admitted you, somebody from that university will call you and congratulate you for your admission,
right,
and begin to give you information and insights of what to expect. The day you step on campus, if you call that number, there will be somebody to meet you, to take you around personally, to show you around the campus and what to do and things like that. so that the students' experience on that campus is second to none. We've
right.
also seen that there's a
Prof,
nexus
I'm
between
afraid we have to leave the conversation here now.
students' experience and their transition to becoming alumni. If you had a very bad experience on campus and you graduate and you move on, and that university comes back to say, please come and support us for this thing, you will not be favorably disposed to doing so because of the experience you had. So these are other major issues.
Prof, can you hear me? We have to leave the conversation now. We have to leave this conversation now, but we must thank you, Secretary General, Committee of Vice Chancellors of Nigerian Universities, Professor Yakubu Aboki Ochefu, for your time on The Breakfast Show.
Thank you very much, viewers.